The red dust of Kaduna swirled in the evening breeze as the sun painted the sky in shades of amber and gold. In the heart of Umwan Rimi, where the scent of suya mingled with the calls of evening prayers, a young man named Joshua walked with purpose through the narrow streets. But this was no ordinary walk, and Joshua was no ordinary man. "Kai Wallahi, this plan of yours is madness," whispered his friend Tund, adjusting the worn cap that shadowed his face. "A man of God pretending to be what he is not? What will the elders say?" Joshua paused beneath the sprawling branches of an ancient baobab tree, its massive trunk bearing the scars and stories of generations. His eyes, usually bright with the fire of revelation, now carried the weight of a deeper searching. "Tund, my brother," he said, his voice carrying the melodic cadence of the Hausa tongue mixed with the authority of one who had wrestled with angels. "Sometimes the heart must be tested by fire to reveal its true gold." The setting sun cast long shadows across the compound where Sister Mercy lived with her grandmother, Mama Hawa. The old woman sat on a worn mat, her weathered hands working prayer beads with the rhythm of ancient incantations. Her granddaughter, Mercy, moved like poetry in motion, her wrapper catching the last rays of sunlight as she swept the compound with graceful efficiency. "Mercy, my child," Mama Hawa called in Hausa, her voice carrying the wisdom of 7 decades. "A woman's heart is like the harmattan wind, it can bring life or destruction depending on what it carries." Mercy paused in her sweeping, her dark eyes reflecting the complexity of a soul that had known both joy and sorrow. At 25 she had watched potential suitors come and go, each one drawn by her beauty but repelled by her family's modest circumstances. Her father, a teacher who had died when she was young, had left them with little more than dignity and faith. "Mama, why do you speak in riddles today?" Mercy asked, settling beside her grandmother on the mat. The old woman's eyes, clouded with age but sharp with spiritual insight, gazed toward the road. "Because, my daughter, sometimes the greatest truths come disguised as the simplest lies." 3 days later, as the morning call to prayer echoed across the city, a figure appeared at their gate. Hunched and humble, dressed in clothes that had seen better decades, the beggar's voice carried a quiet dignity that seemed at odds with his appearance. "Please, Mama," the stranger said in perfect Hausa, his head bowed low, "I have traveled far and hunger weakens my bones. Might you spare a cup of water and perhaps a morsel of bread?" Mama Hawa studied the beggar with eyes that had seen through countless deceptions in her lifetime. Something about this one was different. His hands, though dirty, bore no calluses of hard labor, and his voice carried an education that poverty rarely afforded. "Mercy," she called, never taking her eyes off the stranger, "bring water and food for our guest." As Mercy approached with a calabash of cool water and a plate of fura de nono, the beggar raised his head slightly. Their eyes met for a moment, a collision of souls that sent tremors through the spiritual realm. In that instant, Mercy saw not the worn exterior but something deeper, a light that no amount of dust could dim. "Na god so sai," the beggar whispered, his gratitude carrying an intensity that seemed to burn away the pretense like morning dew before the sun. Days turned into weeks, and the beggar, who had introduced himself simply as Yusuf, became a regular presence in their compound. He would arrive each evening, sharing stories that transported them to distant lands and biblical times, his words weaving spells of wonder and wisdom that made them forget his humble appearance. "This Yusuf," Mercy confided to her friend Fatima as they drew water from the well, "there is something about him that disturbs my peace. When he speaks of the scriptures, it is as if he has walked with the prophets themselves." Fatima, a sharp-tongued girl from the next compound, laughed with the cruelty of youth. "Mercy, your grandmother's kindness has made you soft. The man is a beggar, probably a madman who has memorized some verses to earn his daily bread. You cannot make a king from a pauper's dreams." But Mercy's heart had already begun its own journey of discovery. She found herself looking forward to evening conversations with Yusuf, the way his eyes lit up when he spoke of God's love, the gentle way he corrected her when she stumbled over Arabic pronunciations, the dignity with which he carried himself despite his circumstances. One evening, as the harmattan wind carried the scent of burning leaves across the compound, Mama Hawa confronted her granddaughter. "Child, I see how you look at this beggar. Your heart is walking a dangerous path." Mercy knelt beside her grandmother, her voice soft but firm. "Mama, is it not better to love a man with a good heart than to marry a rich man with no soul? Papa always said that a man's true wealth is measured not in his pocket but in his character." The old woman's laugh was like the rustle of dry leaves. "Ah, my child, you speak like your father. But tell me, what do you truly know about Yusuf? A man can wear many faces, and sometimes the beggar's rags hide a different truth altogether." Unknown to them, their conversation was being observed. From the shadows of the compound's corner, Yusuf, who was indeed the renowned apostle Joshua Selman in disguise, felt the weight of deception pressing upon his spirit like a stone upon his chest. 4 weeks he had watched Mercy's kindness, tested her heart through his false poverty, and witnessed her unwavering compassion for one she believed to be society's forgotten. That night, alone in the small room he had rented in the poorest quarter of the city, Joshua fell to his knees in prayer. "Father," he whispered, his voice breaking with the weight of conviction, "I sought to test her heart, but you have tested mine instead. I have found in her what I didn't even know I was searching for. A love that sees beyond the surface, a heart that reflects your own compassion." The spiritual realm stirred around him as he prayed, and in that moment of vulnerability, the voice of the Almighty seemed to whisper through the silence. "My son, love cannot be built upon deception, no matter how noble the intention. Truth is the foundation upon which all lasting relationships must stand." The next evening brought with it a tension that even the compound's chickens seemed to sense, their usual cackling replaced by an uneasy silence. Yusuf arrived later than usual, his humble posture somehow more pronounced, as if he carried an invisible burden upon his shoulders. "Mercy," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "walk with me to the baobab tree. There are words I must speak, and they cannot wait for another sunset." Under the ancient tree where secrets had been shared for generations, Yusuf began to shed more than just his disguise. "My sister," he said, using the formal address that created distance even as it showed respect, "I must tell you something that will change everything you believe about me." Mercy's heart began to race, sensing the gravity in his tone. "Yusuf, whatever it is, you can tell me. Have I not shown you that your circumstances do not matter to me?" His laugh was bitter, tinged with self-reproach. "Circumstances? My dear Mercy, everything you know about my circumstances is a lie." Slowly, deliberately, he began to remove the layers of deception. First the worn cap, then the tattered shirt, revealing beneath it clothing of fine quality. As he straightened his posture, his true bearing emerged like a sunrise breaking through clouds. "My name is not Yusuf," he said, his voice now carrying the authority she had sensed but never understood. "I am Joshua Selman, and I have built my deception upon your kindness like a thief builds his wealth upon others' losses." The world seemed to tilt beneath Mercy's feet. The baobab tree, witness to countless confessions throughout the centuries, seemed to lean closer as if to better hear this particular revelation. You are the apostle? The man who fills stadiums with his teachings? The one they call the Oracle of Kaduna?" Joshua nodded, his eyes now filled with a shame that his former disguise had never carried. "I came to test your heart, to see if you would love a poor man as readily as you might love a rich one. But in doing so, I have violated the very trust that love requires." Mercy stepped back, her wrapper catching on a root as the full weight of betrayal settled upon her shoulders. "So I have been, what? An experiment? A specimen for your spiritual laboratory?" "No," Joshua said, reaching out instinctively before dropping his hand. "What began as a test became something far more precious. Mercy, in these weeks of deception, I have discovered that you are the woman I have prayed for, the one whose heart beats in rhythm with heaven itself." But Mercy's eyes had already begun to harden, the softness that had drawn him now replaced by the steely resolve of a woman who had been betrayed by one she had begun to trust with her heart. "You speak of heaven, apostle, but your methods belong to a different realm entirely. How can I trust words that come from lips that have spoken nothing but lies?" The confrontation that followed was witnessed only by the ancient tree and the evening stars. Mercy's voice, usually soft and melodious, now carried the power of righteous anger. "You tested my heart? What gave you the right? Am I so unworthy that I must be examined like goods in the market before being deemed suitable for your affection?" Joshua felt each word like a physical blow, recognizing in them the justice of her fury. "Mercy, please understand." "Understand what?" she interrupted, her voice rising with the passion of betrayal. "That the great apostle Joshua Selman believes himself so exalted that he must disguise himself to find genuine love? That he cannot trust God to bring him the right woman without resorting to deception?" The truth in her words cut deeper than any sword. Joshua realized that in his desire to find a woman who would love him for his character rather than his position, he had become the very thing he had sought to avoid: someone who used his position to manipulate and test others. "You want to know what hurts the most?" Mercy continued, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "It is not that you lied about your name or your circumstances. It is that you looked at my kindness and saw it as something to be tested rather than treasured." As Mercy turned to leave, Joshua called out with the desperation of a man watching his future walk away. Mercy, wait. I know I have wronged you terribly, but... She paused without turning back. Apostle, you teach thousands about God's love, about honesty and integrity. Yet you could not extend that same honesty to a woman whose only crime was caring for a stranger. What does that say about the foundation of what you teach? The question hung in the air like incense, heavy with implications that reached far beyond their personal situation. Joshua remained under the baobab tree long after Mercy had disappeared into the darkness, wrestling with the realization that his actions had not only hurt the woman he had come to love but had also compromised the very principles he preached. Days passed in agonizing silence. Joshua returned to his normal life, conducting services and teaching with the same passion as before, but those closest to him noticed a change. His messages carried a new depth of understanding about human frailty, about the dangers of spiritual pride, about the cost of deception even when motivated by seemingly noble intentions. Meanwhile, Mercy struggled with her own internal battle. Her grandmother, who had suspected the truth from the beginning, offered gentle wisdom wrapped in the safety of unconditional love. "My daughter," Mama Hawa said as they sat together preparing an evening meal, "anger is like fire, it can cook your food or burn down your house. The choice is in how you use it." "But Mama," Mercy replied, her voice heavy with hurt, "how can I forgive such deception? How can I trust a man who began our relationship with such a fundamental lie?" The old woman's eyes twinkled with the wisdom of ages. "Child, do you think your grandfather was perfect when I married him? Do you think your father never made mistakes that required forgiveness? Love is not about finding someone who never fails you, it is about choosing someone whose failures you can forgive and whose growth you can support." "This is different, Mama. This was calculated, deliberate." "Yes," the grandmother agreed, "and that makes it both worse and better. Worse because it was intentional, but better because it reveals a man capable of recognizing his error and feeling genuine remorse." As if summoned by their conversation, a knock came at their gate. But instead of Joshua, it was Tund, his friend, who had served as his confidant throughout the deception. "Mercy," Tund said, his voice carrying the weight of someone bearing an uncomfortable message, "I come on behalf of Joshua, though he does not know I am here." Mercy's initial impulse was to send him away, but her grandmother's gentle touch on her arm encouraged her to listen. "The man has not eaten properly in days," Tund continued. "He spends his nights in prayer and his days serving others with an intensity that borders on penance. He has asked me to find you a suitable husband, someone who will love you with the honesty he failed to show." This unexpected revelation struck Mercy like lightning. The man who had deceived her was now attempting to secure her happiness with another, even at the cost of his own desires. "He said," Tund continued, "that your happiness matters more than his own redemption, and that he would rather see you loved properly by another than loved imperfectly by him." Mama Hawa's knowing smile grew wider. "Ah, now we begin to see the true measure of this man's heart." That night, Mercy found herself walking toward the baobab tree where her world had been shattered weeks earlier. To her surprise, she found Joshua there, not in the fine clothes of his true station, but not in beggar's rags either, simply as a man stripped of pretense, sitting in quiet contemplation. "I did not expect to find you here," she said softly. Joshua looked up, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and something deeper. "This tree has become my place of accountability. I come here each night to remember the cost of my deception and to pray for your forgiveness, not so that you might love me again, but so that you might find peace." They sat in silence for a long moment, the night air carrying the sounds of the city settling into sleep around them. "Joshua," Mercy finally said, using his real name for the first time since the revelation, "your friend Tund came to see me today." Joshua's head snapped up in surprise. "I did not send him." "I know. That is what makes his message so powerful." Mercy turned to face him fully. "He told me that you are trying to find me another husband, someone who will love me with the honesty you failed to show." Joshua's voice was barely audible. "You deserve that and more. You deserve a love built on truth from its very foundation." "And what if," Mercy said slowly, "what if I told you that I have been thinking about foundations? About how sometimes the strongest buildings are those that have been torn down and rebuilt with better materials?" Hope flickered in Joshua's eyes like a candle in the wind, afraid to burn too brightly lest it be extinguished again. "Mercy, I cannot ask you to." "You are not asking," she interrupted. "I am choosing. But I am choosing with conditions, with new foundations that must be laid if we are to build anything lasting." Over the next hour, under the watchful presence of the ancient tree, they began the difficult work of rebuilding trust. Mercy laid out her terms with the clarity of a woman who had thought deeply about forgiveness and its requirements. First, she said, no more tests. If you cannot trust God to show you my heart through honest interaction, then you are not ready for love at all. Joshua nodded solemnly. Agreed. Second, you must understand that your position as a man of God makes your behavior not just personal but public. Your deception was not just a betrayal of me, it was a betrayal of the principles you teach others to follow. This truth struck deep, and Joshua felt the weight of his calling settle upon him anew. You're right. I must address this publicly, acknowledge my failure, and teach others from my mistakes. Third, Mercy continued, her voice softening slightly, you must accept that my love for the beggar Yusuf was not born of pity or charity, but of genuine affection for the soul I glimpsed beneath the disguise. If you can accept that I loved you at your pretended lowest, perhaps you can believe that I might love you at your authentic best. The healing that began that night continued over many months. Joshua, true to his word, publicly acknowledged his deception in a sermon that became legendary not for its eloquence, but for its raw honesty about the dangers of spiritual pride and the complexity of human relationships. My brothers and sisters, he had said from the pulpit, his voice carrying the authority of hard-won wisdom, I stand before you not as a man who has never fallen, but as one who has learned that falling is not the end of the story, rising with integrity is what matters. The congregation had sat in stunned silence as their leader confessed his deception, his struggle with pride, and his journey toward authentic love. Some were scandalized, others were inspired by his transparency. But all understood that they were witnessing something rare, a leader who was willing to be vulnerable, to admit error, and to learn from his mistakes. Mercy had been in the congregation that day, and as Joshua spoke, she felt the final walls around her heart begin to crumble. This was not the polished performance of a practiced preacher, but the broken offering of a man who had been humbled by love and truth. Their courtship, when it finally began in earnest, was conducted with a transparency that became legendary in their community. Joshua sought not to impress Mercy with his position or wealth, but to know her mind, to understand her dreams, to support her own calling as a teacher and counselor. Mercy, for her part, challenged Joshua to grow in ways that his success had never required. She pushed him to consider the perspectives of the poor and marginalized, not as subjects for his ministry, but as equals whose dignity deserved recognition. She helped him understand that true spiritual authority came not from position but from the willingness to serve with genuine humility. Their wedding, when it finally came, was a celebration that drew people from across Nigeria and beyond. But it was not the guest list or the grandeur that made it memorable. It was the vows they exchanged, written in their own words and steeped in the hard-won wisdom of their unconventional journey. Mercy, Joshua had said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd, I promise to love you with the honesty I should have shown from the beginning, to cherish your heart without testing it, and to build our future on the foundation of truth, even when truth is difficult to speak or hear. Mercy's response had brought tears to many eyes. Joshua, I promise to love you not despite your failures but because of what your failures have taught us both about grace, forgiveness, and the possibility of redemption. I choose to see in you not the man who deceived me, but the man who had the courage to confess his deception and change his ways. Years later, when people would ask them about their unusual beginning, Mercy would smile and say, sometimes God uses our mistakes to teach us lessons we never could have learned through success alone. Joshua would add, and sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is not our perfection, but our willingness to be transformed by their love. Their marriage became a testimony to many, not of perfection but of redemption. Joshua's ministry, rather than being damaged by his confession, grew deeper and more authentic. People were drawn not just to his teaching, but to his transparency about his own struggles and growth. Mercy established a counseling center where she helped other women navigate complex relationships, drawing from her own experience of betrayal and forgiveness. Her work became particularly powerful among young women who struggled with issues of trust and self-worth. Together, they raised children who understood that love was not about finding someone who never failed them, but about choosing someone whose failures could be forgiven and whose growth could be supported. Their home became a place where honesty was valued over perfection, where mistakes were seen as opportunities for growth rather than reasons for shame. The baobab tree where their crisis had unfolded became a place of pilgrimage for couples seeking guidance. They would often find Joshua and Mercy there in the evenings, still talking, still growing, still learning to love each other with the honesty and transparency that had become the hallmark of their relationship. And sometimes, when the wind was just right and the stars were particularly bright, Visitors claimed they could hear the echo of ancient wisdom whispering through the leaves, the voices of ancestors who had long understood that the strongest love is not the one that never faces trials, but the one that emerges from trials purified and deepened. In the end, Joshua's deception had been transformed into a foundation of trust, Mercy's betrayal had become a source of strength, and their love had become a testament to the power of redemption, not just personal redemption, but the redemption of relationships, of trust, and of the very possibility that two imperfect people could create something beautiful and lasting together. Their story became one that mothers would tell their daughters, that fathers would share with their sons, and that lovers would whisper to each other under starlit skies, that true love is not found in perfection, but in the willingness to be perfectly honest, perfectly vulnerable, and perfectly committed to growing together through whatever storms life might bring. And the baobab tree, ancient witness to their transformation, continued to spread its branches wide, offering shade to other stories, other lovers, other souls seeking to understand the mysterious ways in which deception can be transformed into devotion, betrayal into blessing, and the deepest wounds into the strongest foundations for love. Thus speaks the wisdom of the ancestors, that love tested by fire and refined by truth becomes stronger than gold, more precious than rubies, and more enduring than the ancient trees that shelter our dreams.